Welcome, my name is Tony Goodman and I am host of PlaceCast, a series discussing insights into everything about places across the UK and especially what makes a happy, successful place that people want to visit. With guests from industry, academia, government, including influencers, decision makers, practitioners and other experts, we will be exploring best practice to identify the latest trends and directions. Let's get started. My guest for this episode is Ian Harvey, who is head of the Institute of Place Management, as well as being involved in a number of other activities and organisations. Ian, welcome. And please, can we start by asking you to introduce yourself properly?
Yeah, of course. And thanks very much for having me with you today, Tony, this morning. Yes, I say Ian Harvey. I'm currently the head of the Institute of Place Management. And for any of your listeners who don't know the Institute of Place Management, we're based at Manchester Metropolitan University. And yeah, how have I ended up in this role, which I really believe I'm incredibly fortunate to be in the role. But how have I ended up here? I like to tell people I've worked really hard. I've visited lots of places over the world, over the UK, but my career goes back about 20 years. Oh, you're very kind, Tony. I can see you looking at me there going, he doesn't look old. He doesn't look old enough to.
Of course.
University, go back to university. But my first job out of university was working for something called the Green Flag Award, which some of your viewers and listeners might know as the national standard for parks and green spaces across the UK and now international. So I was given a role as a business analyst, helping to look at data, helping to look at basically what were the good parks doing that other parks could learn from. So I had that role for a number of years. That then led me to do more work with MHCLG and DCMS. I've spent time in London, Newcastle, Birmingham. And fast forward my career, I set up a charity called Civic Voice, working alongside a friend and a colleague. And Civic Voice was the national charity for about 300 community groups across England, working to basically support volunteers to make better places and better communities. But as we all know, COVID happened. And life changes, and due to personal circumstances I won't go into now, I moved, made the transition, and one thing led to another, and I'm now sitting here having a chat with you, Tony, talking about the Institute of Place Management and Places. But what I can say is, ever go from being a young boy, where we lived as a family when we were younger, place matters, and I feel incredibly fortunate to be in the role that I'm in. And I want to make a difference. And hopefully over the next half an hour or so, we'll have a bit of a discussion about how we can do that.
Absolutely. And the purpose of this discussion is to talk about what makes a place happy and through that successful, which is seemingly the aim of every organisation. And for some of the guests that we've had, it's their professional life, being involved in bids or tourism, somewhere in place management. But for you, it's looking at it from more of an academic point of view through the university, but also looking at, through the Institute of Place Management, how best practice can be spread. So let's start by asking you, what do you think makes a place happy and successful?
I have to admit, Tony, we obviously had a bit of a pre-conversation preparing for this. And I've been thinking about that ever since. And I'm looking back to, I could talk about academic studies, I could talk about what others say, and I will probably come on to some of that. But I left this call, our pre-meeting, thinking about, well, what makes a happy place? And a lot of it I've been thinking about personal memories and personal stories, and I can then connect that into the successful. So each year I go with my daughter to the Edinburgh Fringe, to the Edinburgh Festival, And some of my happiest memories I have are sitting just outside, just watching the world go by. And anyone who has been to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival knows you have visitors from all over the world. You have so much culture taking place. You can meet people, you can hear so many different languages. There's the vibrancy, the heritage, the story of Edinburgh. And you've got like a sense of belonging that you're all there to sort of support the culture of Edinburgh. And whenever I think of the Fringe Festival, it puts a smile on my face. It really does. Or I was chatting to my daughter and I said, tell me what a happy place. And she came back with actually something that made me happy. And she said, do you remember when we were in Dublin last year for the Oasis concert? And I was like, absolutely. And again, so we were in Dublin. There was a real sense of belonging, that people were there. The social nature, sort of the good people of Ireland, the good people of Dubliners, and sitting out the independent bars, the vibrancy, the hot weather. It was a really happy place that weekend. And then yesterday, can bring us sort of right back. Yesterday, sort of slightly sort of different, but might be a bit more broader appeal. I went to Everton Ladies. We're playing at Goodison Park, so I took my daughter along to watch Everton Ladies. They got beat 4-1 by Chelsea Ladies, but we can't have everything. But it was great to be sitting there, and the atmosphere of going to a ladies' football game is so different to going to a sort of a normal, sort of a men's football game. And I'm a big follower of football. But actually, the shared experience, the sense of belonging, being at Goodison Park, where some of your viewers, listeners might not know, Everton no longer play at Goodison Park. So it's the first time I've been back to Goodison Park since we've left. Memories come flooding back. So what makes a happy place? To me, I am happy wherever I am with my daughter. So I literally can be, and I think a lot of people would say it's about who you're with, not always where you are, but who you were with. So matters, the people that you are with. But what makes a place successful? Well, Edinburgh, Dublin, sort of many high streets in the UK. It's that vibrancy. It's the people. It's the sense of connection. It's the basics matter. Is it a clean place? Do you have sort of independent businesses? It's that vibe. It's that experience that we all can feel it, but sometimes it's hard to make happen. And yeah, so what makes a happy place? Yeah, it might be a bit not necessarily the answer you were looking for, but when I'm with my daughter, wherever we are, you're probably 9 times out of 10, I'm happy unless she's spending all my money.
And I'm sure that happens on a regular basis. There was so much in that answer that to unpick. So firstly, Dublin. Yeah, I agree. Dublin's a great, vibrant city. We recently carried out a project about tourism in Dublin, and it was interesting and fascinating. And I've been to Dublin many times myself, so I completely appreciate what you're saying. However, one point that you mentioned in that absolutely resonates. You said it was sunny. Well, when it's sunny, it makes all places look better. I've just been in the Lake District for the last weekend, and one of my favourite places is Ambleside, which you might know, in the Lake District. And it was sunny, and it was packed, and it was vibrant, and there was a great feel to it. And the kids were playing in the park, and the sun makes a difference. So one of the things that, unfortunately, if you're running a bid or you're a town manager, that you've got to cope with is a lot of the time it's going to be rainy. And you still want people to come and have some element of happiness. To go back to one of the first points you were making about the Edinburgh Festival. And here's an idea for people. One of the things that I always remember from the Edinburgh Festival, and I've been a few times, the Fringe Festival, is watching a Shakespeare play. Now, you might say, well, what's unusual about that? Well, this was a traveling Shakespeare play. So every scene was at a different spot in the city centre. And the whole of the cast and production team and the audience were all walking around Edinburgh to different pre-picked spots, including sometimes where it was busy, and carrying on with the next scene. And there was something so inclusive and involving about being a part of the production. And when you think about it, anyone could do that. Any place could do that. you could, and it doesn't have to be Shakespeare, but actually that getting people involved in that way is so much a part of it. And you put out a LinkedIn message the other day about coming on this podcast, and one of the points that I picked up, someone was talking about one of the things that they felt was important was having pride in place. Now, I think pride in place, or having the ability to have pride in place, is very important, because if you've not got pride in place, how is a place going to improve? But one of the things that I think pride in place is lacking is you want to make a place really happy and successful. You want to make it successful for people who are coming in to visit, who aren't the locals, and it's the locals primarily that have pride in place. So it goes pride in place plus. And I want to talk to you more about that. But the other things that I think have been mentioned, and the other topics that I want to go through with you that are important in this, and I know you've been discussing, because you were talking to London Bridge about some of this also, and I've been thinking about it since we last spoke. So the other things that come up and have come up with previous PlaceCasts that we've done are the importance of a clean, safe environment, and actually sometimes how difficult that is to achieve. So the physical aspects, the public realm works that can go into that. And also the other big factor that's coming in that you talked about is health, and health on the high street, which is of course increasing all the time. So why don't we start on that with one of the easiest things for people to manage, which is to have a clean environment. What do you see as, both from an academic and a practical and a personal aspect, and your involvement with so many organizations around the country involved in Place, what do you see as the efforts being made and the limitations that people have to carry out that simple process of a clean environment that's attractive, where public realm works become a part of it?
Yeah, well, I'll start by referencing one of my colleagues, Professor Kathy Parker, who anyone who works in the place management sector will know her name. And it was about 20 years or so ago, Kathy and colleagues did some research, and basically it was around sort of litter. And basically the message is the basics really matter. The basics really matter in place management. And even the most beautiful places can be undermined by litter, neglect, potholes, etc. So it's important that we do sort of have maintenance programs in place to sort of look after the everyday that I sort of like to refer to. And it's why sort of business improvement districts have such a key role. I think we have about 340 business improvement districts in the UK. And obviously that is one of the priorities of sort of maintaining that particular area. But what I'm really interested in sort of exploring, Tony, as well, is that lots of places in the UK, and I would say more places in the UK, do not have a business improvement district. So the challenge is, how do those places that maybe don't have the capacity to sort of have that ongoing maintenance, ongoing sort of support, how do they ensure that that town centre, that high street, isn't full of litter, isn't full of sort of disorder, isn't full of the broken window effect? Because we do know it matters. And that's why I love seeing, and bringing it back to the point on pride in place, I love seeing on social media pop-up groups like the Wimbledon Wombles, or the litter heroes of Liverpool, or the Hartlepool heroes. I love seeing those voluntary sort of groups come together, getting together, organising sort of litter picks, as we might call it, then sort of meeting in a coffee shop afterwards, sort of helping to support a local business. Because networks, people coming together, the basics matter, and the basics matter in a way of talking to people, conversations between people. But yeah, it's one of the most important, fundamentally, issues about how a place feels. But actually, with the funding cuts that lots of local authorities have had, since what, 2010. Yeah, the local authorities have had a hard time, but I think, and I would sort of credit the work of Kathy Parker and sort of other colleagues, they realise how important this place, the basics of place management are, in a way that maybe we didn't previously.
So and a lot of your involvement has been political with things like the High Street Task Force and various other things. And I understand you've been a regular into Houses of Parliament for meetings and so on. One of the points you mentioned there was the 330, 340 odd bids who have a role to play in this. But historically, that was a fundamental role of the local authority. And of course, we all know that local authorities are struggling for funding, a lot of them are struggling very badly for funding and having to cut back services more adept. From a political point of view, if you like, with a small p, not with a big P, this division between the bid have to do it or should the council have to do it? Understand that it's important for it to be done, and therefore the bid is often picking it up, but it's picking it up out of limited funds that are often available to, would be often available for more promotional work, even though this is important. And I just to throw into this, one of our newest bids is, and now 7th biggest bid in the country, I understand, is Glasgow, who just started this month. But they had, one of the early tasks they had was a cleanup campaign involving people. So where do you feel that should lie? And is it right or wrong that bids, those towns with bids are getting an advantage, but it's now down to the levy payers to effectively pay for what's already being paid for to the council?
Yeah, and that's quite a big discussion that I know the sector is having about where sort of bids sit into the world. And what I would say, regardless of the organisation and people who are listening, clean places attract people, safe places trade better, confident places will then grow and attract investment. And I was at a round table probably about 6 months or so ago, and I won't name the person who said it, and I won't name the place because that wouldn't be fair. But it was quite telling that they were bringing investors into this particular town, and he shared the story about the direction and the route that they brought the investors in. He said because if we'd have come in the other way, they would have realised the town wasn't looking its best on that particular day. So we know having investment, having safe places trade better, clean places attract people. So it's who is primarily responsible for delivering that on the ground. I'm not going to sit here and say to 350 places across the country how to manage their place. Place management is all about bringing the local partners together, getting the right people around the table and taking the action to deliver the things that are needed. But yes, we know if we want to attract investment, if we want to support growth, clean places, safe places, these things matter.
And that brings me on to the other point I mentioned of safe place. And this is getting a huge amount of negative publicity at the moment with reports about shoplifting and the implications of shoplifting and mobs on the street and violence happening in some places. Now, we know that that's always gone on to some extent, but it's getting a lot more publicity at the moment. So it's incumbent on any place, any town centre, village, whatever, to have a close working relationship with the police. And bids often act as a proxy for the wider community in doing that. What do you see as best practice in ensuring that a place is safe and therefore has a chance of being happier, but making them safe, both for the residents, the visitors, and the local businesses?
I don't even think it's about best practice. I think we all know when we are in a place, if it feels safe. We all know if there are people out and about, we all know if there are businesses that are open, if there are businesses that are trading, if you see other people between different hours of the day, it will give you that sense of security. Unfortunately, too many of our high streets and our town centres, they have been hollowed out, and we can't deny it, we are seeing an increase of, maybe is it organised crime, but there's definitely, we're seeing, and the BBC have done a lot of work on this over the past couple of months, we are seeing some unscrupulous players who are using the high street for other illegal reasons. And all it takes is for one person to sort of walk along the high street and to experience, whether it's antisocial behaviour, whether it's sort of crime, and that whole perception of a place can change. And all it takes is for me to have that one negative experience to then go and tell other people about that one negative experience, and then that news sort of ripples out. But we do know as a society, and we do know the sort of business crime reduction partners, there's business improvement districts, there's place managers. We know what works, but actually this is really complex, messy challenges, that it's not just about what it might have been 20 years ago, Tony, about bringing extra retailers into our high streets. But now our high streets are now facing challenges, complex issues from health, antisocial behaviour. We're now seeing them as social infrastructure. So they've moved quite quickly, and maybe our legislation, our policy, the way that we tackle these challenges is still sort of catching up a little bit.
So you mentioned a couple of things there, which I want to follow up on. You used the phrase hollowing out, which is a good way of putting it. And a couple of things, well, one of the things that caused a lot of hollowing out of town centres, going back quite a long way, was out of town shopping. Initially, things like Arndale centres were built in town centres. But progressively, they moved out of town because people wanted parking and so on. And that hollowed out an awful lot of towns. And that left a lot of vacancies, and those have been filled in different ways, and different people have adjusted to it in different ways. And of course, I think we all know that the economics of being in an out of town shopping park is very different from having a small shop. So small businesses find it much more difficult to be there. And a lot of the time, small businesses make a local town or village more attractive because they give more variety, something that can't be got from the national brands. And one of the things, so there's extensive talk throughout the industry, and has been for a long time, about how hospitality, how coffee shops and bars and restaurants have flooded the high street. And now there is a move that some of those, or a lot of those, are closing because of economic circumstances, and perhaps too many of them in some places. But they still have a place. But one of the things that is newer, and I know you've been thinking about and talking about, is health on the high street. Now, we see from the work that we do how having those health places can help revitalize a high street and town centre simply by bringing in more footfall. And if the offer around them is correct, then there's going to be a halo effect from them. But if it's not, it can just fill up the car parks and bring people in and more foot traffic, but not really increase business to the neighbours. How do you see this as it's gone on so far, and how do you see it progressing in the future?
Well, Tony, you will have seen that I like to put stuff out on LinkedIn. So I do that because I think a lot of ideas are out there. They just haven't been connected with each other yet. So a great idea can be great, but actually people need to know about these things. And I thought that's why I do a lot of LinkedIn. And I think you pointed out that I referenced the London Bridge report, which I shared sort of last week. And that part of me doing that is because the NHS, they have a 10-year plan to sort of do neighbourhood health. So they're looking at how do we put sort of health more towards our high streets and more towards people are I've simplified a huge strategy there, but how do we get sort of our health services at a more local level? That's great. But actually, you then look at who do we have operating at local levels, and business improvement districts, as again, 330, 340 organisations. And so I met with Nadia and the team in London Bridge, based on the back of the report that they published last year, looking at how the role bids can have in sort of delivering this health-based agenda. Because I'm a big believer, Tony, in too many places, too many sectors, we still operate in silos, and there's still lots of good things going on, but actually people don't jump out of their own silo and don't go and connect with others. So I look at this, how will we deliver the NHS sort of a 10-year plan? And the NHS talks about place-based partnerships, talks about, health on the high street. Bids have to absolutely be part of that conversation. So part of me putting out the document that sort of the Team London Bridge colleagues shared is because this is an area of real research interest for the Institute of Place Management. But it was also to sort of think, well, if I share this, let's see what now comes back. And anyone who's seen the post will see several comments then came back, which I've now connected with other people. And IPM, we will be holding an event on June the 10th, where we'll be discussing health and place, where we'll be sort of saying, we now know place matters around people's health. A new report out sort of on the BBC News website, sort of just this week, talking about health inequalities. That if you live, I think it was Blackpool and Hartlepool were compared with Richmond upon Thames. There's like a 20-year life sort of expectancy difference. Where you live matters. So we have now got to be bringing together the different sorts of partners to help address these challenges. And I'm not going to sit here, Tony, and say if we do X, Y, and Z, it'll be fixed, because we all know it's not that simple. What I will say, though, is we still operate too many sectors, still operate in silos, still do not work together. And we know in place-based approaches, you need to get people around the table, whether that's for health, whether that's for housing, whether that's for town centres. We all need to work together just a little bit better than maybe we have in previous times.
I know this is something that's picking up, and I've actually written a blog about it in the past, and I was interviewed on You and Yours on Radio 4 a few months ago about this particular issue and how much it's picking up. And I think one of the things that I find illustrative about this and the whole approach to place management is that I see that we're coming full circle. So we've always had health on the high street, in that the pharmacies and the dentists have always been there. Quite often in a high street, you would have the GP there as well. And certainly the opticians have always been on the high street, or frequently on the high street. So the fact that the NHS is now getting in on the game, they're going back to the way they used to operate. If you go back to the 50s and 60s, they used to be what were called cottage hospitals. They were locally based health providers, and that was replaced by the clinics. Then, of course, they thought, well, we can better serve people by consolidating in big out-of-town, massive out-of-town hospitals that can have every service under the sun provided in one, and all the expensive equipment. Now they're coming back to saying, well, actually, we need to take health back to where the people are, not just have them come to us. And that full circle, I think, concerns me for one reason, is that it's being presented as something that's new, when in fact, what happens is we forget what used to work, go away from it completely to where we're getting problems, and then we come back full circle and think that we're doing something new. So we can see that happening, and you're seeing it very clearly, and there are studies coming out like the London Bridge, which is called a healthy placemaking approach, the London Bridge, the role of business improvement districts in promoting health and well-being. Very good. What other things do you think we have forgotten that we should remember in terms of making places happy, contented, and successful?
Yeah, and you're talking about, I think that's really fascinating there, Tony, sort of saying we've always done this, and you are right in sort of what in one way taking all our health services back to people. But actually, when I talk about health in place, I'm not just talking about it from an NHS lens. You are right that it's getting increasingly more interest as a subject. But I will go back right to the start of my career, which I touched on right at the start. I was involved in the Green Flag Award, and the Green Flag Award was about raising the standard of green spaces, because we know the impact of good quality green space on what that has on sort of an individual's life, access to nature, access to green space for the mental health sort of agendas that we have. But we don't have enough good quality green space across the country. And it's, again, that's all sort of in this different parts of the country. So we need better green space. I look over the past 10 to 15 years, and something I didn't talk about, Tony, was that I set up a social enterprise called Love Wavertree CIC in Liverpool, and it's a community shop. So we raise, basically, we operate as a company. We generate money from a whole different host of opportunities and a whole different ways. And all that money we make, we then reinvest back into the local community. And I'm really proud of the career that I've had. But actually, it's the voluntary stuff that I've done that I'm probably more proud of than anything. And I look at Love Wavertree, and if I go in, I'm at home as we're having this conversation today. If I pop into Love Wavertree CIC, the shop later on today, I will be meeting people who 5 years ago I didn't know, but actually they are now, they're as much family to me as my family are. I have met more people more individuals in the local community through this particular initiative than I ever had before. So I have a real strong sense of community, and I know a lot of people, and we have a lot of volunteers coming in. And you know what? When we ask people, Georgia, one of my colleagues, she'll always sort of do like the onboard and bringing volunteers on. We ask people, why are you getting involved? It's always sort of two reasons. People are lonely, and people want to give back to their local area. And if I could, without naming some of the names and some of the individuals involved, but just to watch how some people who have come in who have been, couldn't say two words, but then actually, go in and like sort of operate in the shop and like the key part of the community. And so you talk about sort of the NHS going back to where we were. Actually, a big part of what we don't have as society is that loneliness is increasingly a real issue. Mental health agenda is increasingly a real issue for us. But I'm a big believer and a big supporter of organisations such as Power to Change, who are bringing people together on the high street, and my own sort of community business. So you talk about the NHS, we've talked about green spaces, we've talked about giving people places to meet each other. Because actually, the world is quite simple. When we're talking about happy people, we all want the same things. In life, we want to make sure our children, we want to make sure our families are healthy. We go to work, do a good day's work, and pay our bills at the end of the month. People are not complex sort of creatures, but maybe over the past sort of couple of decades, we forgot how to be communities.
I completely agree with what you're saying, and recognise that there's a huge amount in what you say as well. So people are wanting to give back. I agree with that. The problem of lonely people is everything about community, and a lot to be said about family. And the fact that families so often separate for economic reasons. The kids go off to university and then they don't come back. So as people then grow older, they're left more alone. So it takes a community and friends and so on. I completely agree with that. And that does have an awful lot. And people get involved because they want to be involved in something, and they want to have, going back to where we were earlier, pride in place.
And sense of belonging. People want to be part of something. So me sitting at Everton Football Club, sort of watching Everton. I don't know why I keep doing it, Tony. I mean, I don't know. It's all about we're talking about happy places. It makes me so unhappy. But people want a sense of belonging. People want to feel part of a community. People want to be more than what they are. We are creatures of sort of habit. But when people start giving back, and I look at the work of Love Way Retreat, and there's thousands of groups like this across the country, and it's what makes this nation, the sort of the UK, so sort of is special. But I have individuals who now come in, give time in our shop. We run a food club, so we're helping feed local families. Last year we organised the Car Free Day, so we shut our high street. We had over 5,000 people come along, all organised by volunteers. We worked alongside the council, who supported us with like the licenses, etc. A brilliant event. So we're creating capacity. We're helping our high street, but actually, what we're doing is we're building a community. The other stuff comes next. That we've been organising lots of events, and one of the bar owners on this particular high street sort of is invested in this bar because they said they could see a sense of confidence. They could see something was changing. They could see it online. People were starting to talk. Nothing's changed. Well, it still looks like the high street that it was a couple of years ago. Businesses turn over. Question marks over how's that shop still operating. Got coffee shops, but actually nothing physically has really changed. But you can sense that attachment, that sense of belonging, that sense of safety, because you recognise faces now. You sort of see people. You're part of a community, and then the confidence comes from a place, and then you grow and you support each other. It's not really, as you go back to the NHS, it's not really complex, and we'll think it through here, Tony.
No, it's not complex. We were in a small village yesterday in the sunshine, I'm very pleased to say. And I didn't know this place particularly. And we've gone into one shop and I asked the shopkeeper for directions to the village green, which wasn't that far away, but there was 2 roads. And they came out from behind the counter, walked us out of the shop and made sure we knew exactly which way to go to get to the village green, because it was clear they had pride in the place and they wanted us to enjoy the experience. That's lovely. You also mentioned something that I think is vitally important and, as you said, overlooked sometimes, which is the role of green spaces. Now, our business is very involved in green spaces across the country. And that runs from some of the biggest green spaces that exist. So something like the South Downs Way, which is 100 miles long, providing information to them, to what I'm proud to say is probably the best historic attraction in the country, which is actually a major green space, which is Blenheim Palace, which I love. It's a fabulous place. Yeah. But one of the things that sometimes overlooked is the role of the local park. Now, if you think about the famous ones, London and Hyde Park and all the other parks, Regent Park and all the other parks that are there, Green Park, these are often described as the lungs of the city. And let's face it, London needs lungs more than most places. If you look at somewhere like Manchester, I'm very disappointed to say that Piccadilly Gardens is no longer the lung that it used to be. And there aren't that many green spaces in the centre of Manchester. It's become clogged. But looking around, and what made me think of this yesterday was there was a village green, and it was a centre of activity, and the activity went on around it and within it. We're missing that, but so many councils have parks that are those green spaces that can be used to help people's mental health. Because if you just have and I should say, my local bid actually have a regular walk around the town. So it's a networking group, lonely people can come, everyone can go and get exercises together and perhaps learn more about the town and go to a local park. How do you, let's say, as the IPM, persuade more locations, more places, more towns, more villages, to use those green spaces as an integral part of well-being for their citizens and visitors.
Okay, so what I would say is IPM will never tell people what to do. I have academic colleagues who will undertake the research, and we will share the research. We will share webinars. We will organise events, and we will have a discussion. So that's not what we're here. We follow evidence. So if my colleague Professor Steve Millington was on the call, he would talk to you about our vital and viable sort of toolkit. There are 237 factors that sort of contribute to the success of a place, but actually there are 25 sort of factors that really make a difference. So Steve will use that framework, looking at a place, and then we will make the recommendations to a place manager, to a sort of a council chief executive, saying this is what your place might be missing based on the evidence that we've sort of followed. So we know. And I think that we were both sitting here, and there was a third panelist saying green spaces are rubbish and you shouldn't be investing in green spaces. I think I'd probably come back and say fake news, because we know green spaces are so important. And in my role, I am incredibly fortunate to sort of travel around to 3 different places. And you talk about Blenheim Palace, talk about Royal Parks. I'm fortunate in Liverpool that we've got some of the Stanley Park, Birkenhead Park, Sefton Park, and what I like about green spaces is that it brings the community together. It can bring a community. You can see it's a visual. It's the lungs of the city. Yeah, it helps with air quality and all the mental health. But actually, I love going to Sefton Park, and it's just like a real demonstration of the city of Liverpool. Liverpool talks about being a world in one city. And you can see Sefton Park at the weekend, as it's just been. It literally is the world in one city. And you can just show communities are integrated, communities are just hanging out, just side by side. But it's the green space that's attracting you together with your family, with their family, with friends. But place inequalities, we know that some places don't have enough libraries, some places don't have enough green spaces. I do hope and I do believe with the NHS 10-year long-term plan, it's not just about putting an NHS diagnostic centre in the middle of the town centre. I'm hoping, and this is why IPM are having a particular interest in, it's that place-based discussion. So you will see, and we are literally right at the start of this as an area of research interest for IPM. You will see, hopefully over the next sort of 6 months, next couple of years, we will be doing a lot more convening of bringing together partners here in the UK, across Europe and the rest of the world, to learn how other places are actually sort of, whether it's green spaces, whether it's looking after bringing the air quality down, whether it's sort of social infrastructure, whether it's college hospitals, as you talked about before, Tony. We will be doing a lot of sharing success. And you hope if you talk about stuff enough gets sort of out there and enough people pick up. And because I go back to the point that I said, this week the BBC put out a news story. If you live in Blackpool or Hartlepool, as compared to sort of Richmond upon Thames, it's 20-year life difference. So we need ways of fixing that.
We do, and I completely agree with you. And the irony is that though it's often said that living by the seaside actually enhances your health. So, having somewhere like Blackpool compared to Richmond it's even worse than it appears. And there's a huge amount to be done that goes way beyond just the place or the capabilities. But for anyone listening to this, you might think that you ought to be listening to the discussions going on in the Institute of Place Management, and I would agree with you. So for those of you that aren't members yet, and I should declare an interest because I'm also a fellow of the Institute, you should get involved, because learning more about what's going on and discussing best practice and what works and what doesn't and what's tried and what worked years ago and could be brought back must be a good way forward. So,
yeah, and I appreciate you sort of encouraging people to join the Institute of Place Management, Tony, and I'll just take that as a chance to say the reason why I was attracted to the role was the fact that it was based within a university, and the fact that I have academic colleagues who are world leading in subjects from sort of children's rights in sort of towns, through to sort of footfall data, through to changing retail patterns, through to tourism in place, through to creative culture in industries, through to health. I have academic colleagues who are all world leading in their particular subjects, who basically want to make the world a better place. And we are really fortunate that Manchester Metropolitan University backs the Institute, and we have this global network of individuals in the UK, across Europe and the rest of the world, who I would say are at the forefront of an emerging discipline. We know place management is not as old as the town planning or as architecture, but actually as a emerging theme, place is absolutely the future. And we can tell that from our membership. We have architects, planners, economic development officers, we have library managers, we have people from the NHS, people from all different sectors are now realising, actually, and I go back to my earlier point, this is not about silos anymore. To solve society's and the world's greatest problems and challenges that we have to work together. And place is a concept that can actually bring some of those things together.
Absolutely. And we're obviously, as you know, involved in a lot of that measurement and around things like footfall. But one of the things I'd be interested to discuss with some of your academics is a point that we've been making regularly recently, that footfall alone is not enough. It tells you what happened, but not the who or the why or the effect. And those are vital components for any place to understand what's really going on. They have to go way beyond just footfall. It's historically, it was all they could do, going back to the time when those measurements used to be by someone standing on a street corner with a clipboard. Obviously, we've moved a long way since then, but it has changed an awful lot, and the possibilities have changed a huge amount. So all of that is absolutely brilliant. Let me, as we're coming to the end of our time and time has flown, let me ask you, if we were having this conversation in 10 years' time, what would you hope had changed about how we design, manage, and talk about our towns, cities, villages, and the places, locations that we've been talking about today?
I don't know. That's an interesting question, and I didn't expect you to ask that, Tony. But so I like that. So this is me thinking of what would change. Actually, places are always changing. So a place that might be not doing too well today, I would hope that place would be better. A place where health inequalities are not as good, I hope they would be better. What I would say is I would rather answer how we sort of make that happen. Sort of everywhere is always every place is always changing, and that will continue to be how it is. But I would really like to think that how we go about managing places really does improve and really does change. There's still too many places, Tony, that just don't work in collaboration. We know what you need to do to sort of turn a high street around. Collaboration, having a vision, bringing the community in, but still too many places don't follow that approach. Still too many sort of places are siloed, that you've got different partners who are doing different things but not working together. That's in the UK, across Europe and the rest of the world. So what will change? I think places will always change. We talked earlier on about sort of health and the NHS, and you were saying that's how we were doing it 50 years ago. So places, maybe we'll just sort of come full circle. Places will keep sort of going full circle again. But how we go about working together, I would really like to see us being much more collaborative and much more sort of getting out of our individual silos, because I still think we don't talk about that enough as a country, and that is still a huge problem, that we don't work together. We're still operating in silos. So what would I like to see change? Places will always change. How we work together, I really would like to improve.
And if there's one habit you would like every local leader, be that of a council or a bid or just someone that's running a Pride in Place organisation, one habit that you'd like them to adopt tomorrow that would make their place happier over time, what would it be?
One habit, each first Monday of each month, walk along your high street and ask yourself, does this make you, do you feel proud walking along this high street? Would you be prepared to have this as your own high street? Would you be prepared to call this home? Do that once a month. Let's see where we end up.
In management terms, that always used to be called managing by walking about.
Again, we're going back to sort of stuff that we've done 50 years ago, Tony. No ideas ever new.
Ian Harvey, it's been a delight to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ian Harvey of the Institute of Place Management.
Thanks, Tony.